Thank you, Counsel. Justice Thomas, anything further? Justice Alito? Justice Sotomayor, anything further? Mrs. Kagan? Justice Gorsuch?
I am a little uncertain about the government's position on what it means in Factor 1. The purpose of the use could mean, as we've discussed, they're both being used for identifying an individual in a magazine. Okay. Or it could mean the purpose of the use could have something to do with the artistic message being conveyed. I've heard bits of both flavors from both sides in this case. And certainly the Second Circuit thought that the latter idea, that there's some artistic message that's relevant at step one, is part of the analysis. And what is the government's position? I could see possibly saying, oh no, it's only that it's being used for commercial purposes in a magazine. It's the same use of the image, and that any differences between the images is something that we take account of maybe in Factor 3, which has to do with the amount and substantiality of the portion used. Can you help clarify that for me?
Yes, we think it's principally the purpose and character of the use. It's a broad inquiry, and we're not trying to carve out certain justifications from not being made. But what you are looking at is whether you have a purpose along the lines that is distinct, right? It's distinct from the original purpose, and that the use at issue, it was essential for you to copy from the underlying work to accomplish that purpose. And I think that the court,
I'm going to stop you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but that isn't helpful for me.
Okay.
Okay. And maybe I'm being too dramatic in the difference between the two, but I do see the way to read number one, the first factor, in two very different ways. The purpose of the use could be the purpose of this particular use in a commercial setting, right? I mean, because it does go on and talk about commercial versus non-commercial. And here we would say they're both being used in magazine covers to identify an individual. Okay, done. Or one could say, but Andy Warhol had all sorts of different subjective meanings, and a reasonable viewer could take away different meanings from them. Is that second thing relevant at all at the first step in the government's view? And I kind of like a yes or a no if I can get one out of you.
Can I say yes to part of your question and explain why? Is that okay?
You can do whatever you want. I was just
Thank you.
hoping for a yes or no.
Well, the reason that I would like to do that is because you asked about his subjective intent, then you also asked about the reasonable perception of the audience. So I don't think the subjective intent is relevant, so that's a no to that part of the question.
All right.
But to the to the audience's perception, I think it can be relevant, and here's how. I think Campbell's soup can is a very good example of this. In Campbell's soup cans, the effect on the viewer, the effect on the audience, depended on the incorporation of a very well-known commercial advertising logo. It wouldn't have worked if you...
Well, let me stop you there, and I'm sorry to interrupt again, but see, Campbell's soup seems to be an easy case, because the purpose of the use for Andy Warhol was not to sell tomato soup in the supermarket. It was to induce a reaction from a viewer in a museum or in other settings. And the difficulty of this case is that this particular image is being used, arguably, maybe, for the same purpose to identify an individual in a magazine, okay, in a commercial setting. So that the Campbell soup one seems to be a very different case, and this is a much harder case. So back to my question.
So I completely agree with you on the purpose of the use being very different in the Campbell's soup can analysis, which makes it an easier case. But I was also using the Campbell's soup cans as an example of why the effect on the audience would matter. And the effect of the audience in the Campbell's soup can case, it would matter that you incorporated from a pre-existing commercial advertising logo, as opposed to made your own logo, made up a logo. Whereas here, if he had taken his own photograph of Prince, that wasn't necessary for the effect, which is a very different type of analysis. I hope I answered Your Honor's question.
You've done a great job. Thank you.